I don't know if you know David Petraeus, the American general who lost his job recently. He said if you lose in Afghanistan, it's because two reasons, the Taliban and PowerPoint. Because it induces linear thinking, you know, bullet points and stuff. So here it's a real 3D presentation in 3 dimensions. So what I want to focus... first I wanted to relay some good news. Because one of the things I noticed when I watched TV in Ireland is how depressing it all was. So I was talking to... Where is she sitting? There. In Brazil, every municipality is funding permaculture courses. Every city in the country of Brazil is funding permaculture courses. I mean, that's an example of what I think is really good news. Give you a few other good newses. In Barcelona, the city has a pledge that it gave to the Fab Labs during a meeting of Fab Labs of the whole world, in which by 2020, they want one Fab Lab in every neighborhood of the city. And by 2050, they want 50% of the food production and manufacturing done locally through distributed manufacturing. The co-working space in Barcelona, when I visited them a few years ago, there was one. 3 years later, there were 50. So indicating that young people are mutualizing their working spaces. Fab Labs in Vienna, when I went there, I visited one which was subsidized by the city. 3 years later, there were 15 only in Vienna, with a rural hub coalition with 15, well, I'm not sure about that figure, but anyway, a number of Fab Labs, rural hackerspaces in the whole of Austria doing rural development. What else could I tell you? But I think that's enough to tell you that yes, there is a crisis. Yes, there is an ecological crisis, a climate crisis, an economic crisis, a systemic crisis. But it's when people are in crisis that they're doing something about it and that they're innovating and creating new alternatives. And there is definite linkage between the growth of co-ops and the systemic crisis of capitalism. You can actually see the growth of co-ops when it goes bad, and then it tapers off and they start demutualizing. But now after 2008, we are again in a revival of cooperativism. But there's something is new today, which I think needs to be discussed by the co-op movement, which is the re-emergence of the commons. And so the theme of today is how can we think about the relationship between commons and co-ops. I don't know if most of you are familiar with what a commons is. And it's actually hard to define in some ways, but I'll try anyway. So a commons at the most basic level is a shared resource. So you can have land commons, fishery commons, forest commons, mountain slope commons. They are managed by a whole community on behalf of the community, right? But unlike a co-op, it's not really owned by individuals. So you normally don't have an individual share in a commons. It's something, so there are different kinds of commons. Natural commons that you inherit, so physical commons. You have immaterial commons that you inherit, like language and culture. You have immaterial commons that you create, and this is actually the topic of my talk, because this is the new thing that's happening today. So we're talking about an enormous explosion of digital commons, of new commons that did not exist 15 years ago, and that are changing the way we conceive of production. And then we have material commons that we can create. And this would be, for example, machinery, commons of machinery, not machine co-ops, but actually commons of machinery. So I'll get into these things a bit later. So that's one distinction, physical and not physical. And another important thing is rival versus non-rival. So rival good typically is this. If you steal my glasses, I can't see because I no longer have it. But if I share a piece of music with you, I have the music, you have the music, we both have the music. We're actually even richer by sharing than by not sharing, right? So some call it even anti-rival goods. Because the more you share, the richer you are, right? So music, culture, they're non-rival goods. You don't lose anything by sharing them, you actually make yourself richer. Now, there is a study in the US which I think is interesting. It's called the Fair Use Report. It's probably 2 years old by now, and I think they used to do it every 2 years. And it calculates the weight of the commons economy in the US. So shared knowledge. So economies that grow around shared knowledge pools. It's 1/6 of GDP. It's 17 million workers, right? So this is like things like geolocation, because in the US, geographic information is shared openly to all the citizens. So anybody in the US, any entrepreneur, any citizen, any public official, can use the geographic commons and build services on top of that commons, creating an economy around it. But what is most interesting for me is the new commons of knowledge, code, and design that do what I call commons-oriented peer production. So how does that work? It's a new system because it's a whole new way of conceiving what labor and capital is, right? To be really short in a long history, I think there are 3 major revolutions in human productivity. And the first, it coincides with the invention of civilization, is the invention of coercion, right? Coerced labor is the basis of our civilization. Slavery, right? We went out of the tribal egalitarian systems to civilization through slavery mostly, conquering other people, making them slaves. Serfhood, feudalism, is a bit of an improvement in the sense that people were no longer property. They were bound to the land, but instead of the owners keeping 100% of their produce, it was 50%, more or less, right? And serfs have their they have their land, they have their commons, they have their families, they have their religion, they have a real cultural and spiritual life, which slaves didn't really have. But it was still coercion, right? They were bound to the land, they were not free. Capitalism comes along and somehow changes that in a kind of fundamental way, at least at the theory level, let's put it that way. Instead of having purely external negative coercion, it adds external, internal motivation. How to explain this? So the theory of capitalism is, I have labor, I can sell it to you, and you pay me for it, right? So it's different from pure coercion. It's a new system where there's actually individual motivation plays a big role. And it is a revolution in human productivity. If you see the level of material development after and before, it definitely worked. But I want to introduce a third level, a third revolution in human productivity, which is what we have to do with commons-oriented peer production. How many people are coerced to work for Wikipedia? Well, maybe we don't know. Maybe there are slaves, but I don't think so, right? So nobody's coerced. How many people work for Wikipedia because they get paid to produce content? Now, there must be some, but it's probably a very tiny percent, because it's not a commodity. It's not for sale. So here we have a system of production of knowledge which outcompeted and outcooperated Britannica and the paid systems based on labor and capital, which is hyper-productive. And it's totally based on contributions, not on labor as a commodity, right? So this system went from knowledge to software. Today, open source software is a de facto standard for new software companies. You don't get money from venture capital with proprietary software anymore. You still have big old companies, legacy systems, but you don't have new ones. And this is, the Fab Lab is a bit of an example of that. This is starting to happen now in the field of manufacturing. If you're young and you don't have so much money and the bank is not lending you money, and so you're not going to be able to pay 20, 40, 60 top engineers, what do? Well, you join an open hardware community, because there engineers from the whole world are already cooperating, creating a commons of design for a particular machining community. One of the things that I'm quite enthusiastic about is, for example, the open agricultural machining design communities. You probably know some of them. One is called Open Source Ecology, Civilization in a Box. they developed 54, they are developing 54 machines that are essential for human civilization. I'm not sure how many are ready, maybe 6 or 7 by now. So these machines are fully shareable by everyone in the world. You can download the design and you can make the machine if you want to. Another example is the Open Tech Collaborative, which makes open source beehives, for example. As you know, the bees are in danger, and if the bees die, we die with them. So they are making a 3D printed open source beehive with open sensor inside them to monitor the health of the bees. Farm Hack in the US, the Young Farmers Association, they have thousands of designs for agricultural machines. In France, Atelier Paysan.fr, similar. So just to give you an indication that this kind of revolution is moving from software knowledge to design, and because design it's moving to manufacturing, right? So we have now open source hardware, which is actually linked to making things. And the idea is that the distribution of knowledge, code and design, is being matched with the distribution of machines. In other words, machines are getting smaller and smaller, like 3D printing machines and CNC laser cutters, etc., creating the idea that capital is becoming democratized. So we can rethink how we do production. For example, we could think, and this is an example, I usually use a glass, but I'll use my glasses this time. Okay, how much, this is an industrial object. A German economist and monetary theorist, Margaret Kennedy, calculated that 45% of any industrial object, this was already the case in the 1980s, has 45% debt. So everything you pay today, about half of the cost is debt servicing, right? Because we have interest-based money creation, compound interest. And so it's hockey stick evolution of debt. Second thing is there was a study about last year that showed that not with the price, but if you look at material and energy, it costs 3 times as much to transport an object than to make it. So all the prices that we are paying, you're paying 4 times more because these glasses are probably made, I don't know, probably in China, I would guess. I'm not sure where they are made, but as a general principle. Thirdly, we have the issue of IP, intellectual property rent, which is today the main way to make money. You don't make money in production, right? Tesco retail has 2% average profit. That's not where they make the profit. The Chinese who make the Nike shoes or the Apple computer only have 3 or 4% profit. 70% of the profit goes to Apple because they control the knowledge and the networks and the branding, in other words, the immaterial aspects of this supply chain. So what does it have to do with co-ops? Well, our good friend Karl Marx, a long time ago, said, and it was actually for co-ops, but he said, he was also critical, he said, co-ops are dwarfish forms. Why did he say that? Well, he said that if you compare them at that time with capital, they could not really compete. They could maintain themselves, sometimes they could grow, but overall, he didn't believe they could outcompete, outcooperate capitalism. This has changed, because today, if we combine the co-ops with the commons, we actually have a hyper-productive mode of production. And this is not really happening yet. Who is using today commons-based pre-production? It's capital, right? If you look at the Linux economy, so people are contributing worldwide to developing open source software. But if you have to make a living with Linux, you have to find work with IBM or Red Hat for-profit companies, right? So here's the issue. The issue is that we have increasingly commons, but if we want to make a living, we still have to be labor for capital. And so here is, I think, where the historical opportunity is for co-ops to jump in. Because with commons, with digital commons, you no longer dwarfish form, right? Why are multinationals so strong? Because they have global networks. that we could not make and afford until about 15 years ago. That has changed. There is no reason now that we cannot build global co-ops combined with digital commons that can easily work better than any for-profit firm. And it's more conversion with commons, because think about the psychology of a commoner. If I contribute to Linux or Wikipedia or Arduino or the Wikispeed open source car, and I know, and I do this as a free contributor, and somebody else is going to tell me what to do, am I going to do it? I'm not going to do it, because I'm freely contributing, right? So a hierarchical system is not very appropriate for a system that is based on contributions. It discourages contributions. So participative process is actually goes together with that contributory system. Then the third step, so open input, participatory process, is commons-oriented output. You use a particular license that guarantees that the work remains universally available and shareable. This is also necessary, because why should I work and contribute to a project if somebody can say it's mine, right? So you're not going to do it. So the commons-oriented output is actually a necessary condition for the whole system to work and grow. But if you want to make a living doing this, you need a co-op, right? So this is, I think, what is very important to do, is that we start thinking about how to converge the cooperative world, with its economic democracy, and one man, one share idea, with the idea of creating commons together. And the linkage between the two is that when we work for a digital commons, we don't need to worry about sharing at all, right? Because it has zero marginal reproduction cost. So if once you make a piece of software, you can copy it infinitely at a very, very, very low marginal cost. Same for music. Same for everything which is translatable in digital format. But if you work with machines, if you produce things that are rival, then you need to think about reinvestment, materials, energy. So you need an economic form which can balance input and output. And this is where the co-ops can come in. Now, so I think some things need to change in the cooperative world in order to make that work. And this is a bit of a critique, and I think John did the same, but I'll be a bit more specific. I'm a big fan of Mondragon. But Mondragon is a good example of some of the issues we have with traditional co-ops. Mondragon goes to Poland. And Mondragon is owned by its own workers. But when they go to Poland, they think, well, they're not us. They're foreigners. And maybe, we shouldn't share the bonuses with them, right? So what we're going to do is going to hire the workers in Poland at a minimum wage, because we want to be competitive. We're competing in the capitalist market. And then we have a strike of the workers in Poland against Mondragon, right? I don't think this should happen in a co-op, personally, right? So this is a first thing. I think we need so I have developed the proposal of open cooperatives, and Joseph, who sits there, has a kind of a similar but not exactly the same. So I'll tell you my version of open co-ops. Yeah, Joseph Davis-Coe sitting there. Yeah, wrote a fantastic article on open co-ops recently. So here is the P2P version, if you like, of the open co-op idea. An open cooperative is a co-op which has a common good in its statutes. So it's not producing for profit, it's producing for social need. Doesn't mean it cannot make a profit, it means the profit has to be reinvested in the production of that social need, right? Second, and John mentioned this big wave of multi-stakeholder co-ops. Everybody affected by the activity should have a say in the co-governance and co-production of the co-op system. But here are the two important ones. The third one is open co-ops co-produce commons. Mondragon does not produce a commons. Mondragon produces a lot of benefits for their community, produces wages for their workers, but it uses patents. It uses copyright. It is not. It doesn't share its, its advances. Why is it so important? Well, if you look at the history of innovation and you look at patents, it's pretty classic, and it's true for everything: steel, coal technology, all of that, steam. So you see a huge leap of innovation when the technology is invented, and then the invention is patented. What happens? Flat, right? Flat for 20 years, no innovation. Patents have nothing to do with innovation. Patents have to do with protecting an innovation already done for a monopoly player. So you have a flat line for 20 years. Then the thing is depatented, and whoop, the hockey stick starts again. This is why we are here, 3D printing, right? How many years ago? 10, 12 years ago? 3D printing got depatented. So it went from a niche industry that nobody knew about to this massive development in just 10 years. It's incredible what happened once 3D printing got liberated from its patents. So it's very important to produce commons. So I think co-ops should co-produce commons. This can be immaterial digital commons, or could be physical commons. With John, we visited a very interesting project in Quito, in the south of Quito, Alianza Solidaria. It's a housing co-op. And what they do is they reclaim the ravines, which are really used as a dump in Quito. It's really sad to see. And Quito is full of ravines that you don't see, but until you almost fall in them. And people just, throw their waste in there, right? So the housing co-op reclaimed the ravines and made them into public parks as a commons, right? So the open co-op does produce a commons. But the fourth proposal is also important. It's the globality. Everybody's now talking about locality and local production and local resilience, and of course I'm all for it. But as long as we only do local, we don't have power to change the global system, right? So today we have global multinationals, we have interstate organizations, we even have global NGOs, but we don't have global, commons-oriented, cooperative civic institutions. And we need to develop them. And this is why, let's take a hypothetical example. There are today 26 open source cars. One of them is called Wikispeed, 5 times as fuel efficient as Detroit. Detroit is not interested. So this is amazing, right? You think, the problem of innovation. Innovation is not a problem. Most innovations go in the shelf in a private company, right? Because a private company innovates for the market. The market needs to be maintained scarce. Otherwise, you have no supply and demand dynamic. So I don't know about Ireland, but in Belgium we have fiber around the highways, we have fiber around the railways, and we have rings of fiber around the cities. They're used 0.0005% of their capacity. But yet the telcos, and I used to work for them, so I know this very well, the telcos say, we have to abolish net neutrality because we don't have enough broadband for everyone, and we have to recover our costs, right? This is not true. There is an oversupply of broadband in fiber which is not being used because it would destroy the market for broadband, right? So it's very important that innovation has to be located in open community. If you're an open design community, you design for sustainability, modularity, circularity, cradle to cradle, in a way that a company will never do. Because they need to maintain the scarcity of their products and protect their legacy system. So it's very important to have this. So this is what I call the open co-op. Now, you have to tell me when I have to stop. I don't know where Dave is. 5 minutes? Okay. So I want to say something, and this is a bit complicated. This is about licensing, right? And we have a little controversy also with Joseph about this, so that could be for later discussion. So today, the open source movement uses sharing licenses. And I will say it a bit provocatively, and I always tell myself I shouldn't say it like that, but I say it anyway. So here it goes. The more communistic the license, the more capitalistic the practice, right? So the definition of communism in the 19th century was everybody who can contributes, anybody who needs can take. That was, we're not talking about the Soviet Union, we're talking about the technical definition of what we call communal shareholding. And this is basically what open source does in the field of code and design and knowledge. Everybody can contribute and everybody can use, right? So we have a bit of a paradox. I'm sure that Marx didn't think about this at his time. We have some kind of cyber communism operating at the very heart of capitalism. This is the reality today. So the issue is the following. If I have a fully open license, IBM can use and contribute and make a business around our commons. Now, is that a good thing or not? In many ways, this is a good thing, right? Because if you have a fully open license, it can grow very quickly. But the problem is, it will grow very quickly on the basis of a for-profit system. So I think we need something else. And we have had open source software for 20 years, so we pretty much know that this is the result of open source software, and it will be for open source hardware. So here is a little tweak. What if we say that we change a license to the following rule? If you're for-profit and you contribute, that is fine. But if you're for-profit that does not contribute, you have to pay for the license. What would that change? Well, what would change is that we would reintroduce the notion of reciprocity in the market, right? And today's markets, they externalize everything, right? In the Middle Ages, we had moral economies. Like, if I want to trade with you in a medieval city, you decide the price between both of us. That was the system, right? There was always a third person that actually decided on the price. And they had a just price theory. The food would be bought by the city officials. And the traders could not ask a free price until 5 p.m. in the evening. They even had hooded people, nobody knew where they were, who had the right to execute any speculator on site, right? So we may disagree with the methods, but I just wanted to say that this was not a free-priced, free market system as we understand it today. It was a moral economy designed to protect the stability of the medieval system, because no food meant riots, right? And this is what we changed with capitalism. And Ireland is a fantastic example. I mean, it's a dramatic example, right? Where how many million people were killed because the food was taken out of Ireland to sell somewhere else, right? So there was no moral economy there. You could die because the absentee landlords were selling your potatoes somewhere else. So the idea of reintroducing reciprocity in the market, I think, is a very important idea. And I propose to do this with a new type of license. So how would this work? And this is my conclusion. So at the heart of peer production, commons-oriented peer production, you have a community of contributors, paid or unpaid, who are creating a common shared resource. This resource creates an economy, right? People pay. How does that work? Well, if I write for Linux and you need Linux, you pay me to develop new code, to adapt the code to your needs, right? So or you want to learn about it, so I'm teaching. Or you want insurance that it will go well, or you want maintenance. So around the commons, there's actually a huge economic field that emerges. And here, I just want to briefly mention this. In America, you have fully open geographic commons and a huge economy around geolocation. In Europe, we don't want to share. So we sell licenses to 2 or 3 big companies in every country, and we have a very small geographic economy. So I just want to say this, the commons, they're actually very economic. They create a huge economic activity around them. They actually have more economy than a proprietary system. So around these commons, you would have an entrepreneurial coalition of ethical enterprise. And I would propose that these ethical enterprises should be open co-ops, right? So you have the commons, and they're surrounded by a business ecosystem of co-ops. A third institution that is very common in this new system is a foundation. They are called the FLOSS Foundations, Free Libre Open Software Foundations. Think about the Linux Foundation for Linux, the Wikimedia Foundation for Wikipedia. I don't know if there is an Arduino Foundation, but I'm sure there will be soon. The Bitcoin Foundation for the Bitcoin Commons, etc., etc. So what do these foundations do? They're not classic NGOs. Here's the difference. A classic NGO thinks, here we have a problem, and we need resources to solve the problem. It's a scarcity approach. Therefore, we will do fundraising, pay people, and we will solve the problem. That's the NGO approach, right? The Commons Foundation approach is different. Here is a problem. Let's create an ecosystem where everybody can contribute solutions to solve that problem. It's an abundance-based approach. The idea that there is knowledge, skills available in abundance to solve a particular issue. And so what they do not do is they do not command the work. The Wikimedia Foundation does not tell anybody what to write in the Wikipedia. The Linux Foundation does not tell anybody what to write in Linux. But what they do is they enable and empower the system of cooperation to continue over time, paying servers, convening conferences, creating certification schemes, etc., etc. So now think, and this is my real conclusion, if I can get booted out. Imagine this would be a social system, right? So here's what we have today. We think that value is created privately by labor and capital. That's our economy. We think the state is an external actor that polices the market because by themselves, market players are not ethical. And civic society is very clear what we think of it because we call them non-governmental and non-profit. So in other words, civil society is a rest category. It's what you do when you come home tired from work, right? Unless you're retired or something like that. But so this is the basic idea today. So what's the new idea? Well, the new idea is that civil society is the core of society and citizens are productive. They are creating the value through their contributions to the commons. These same citizens, commoners, are also cooperators. So in their private capacity, they're working cooperatives, creating the economy and their livelihoods around their shared commons. And the FLOSS foundations are the image of a new form of state, which I call the partner state, which enables and empowers the social cooperation. So what they do is, for example, this is basically what John talked about, the solidarity co-ops, right? It's the commonification of public services. It's public commons partnerships. So the state doesn't say, I decide, and you're just a client. What the state does in that vision is, what do you need to make your system work? What kind of civic infrastructures do we need to build together to make this system a viable and thrivable system? So I think I'll kind of end with this. And again, what I'm actually saying is that co-ops have a vital role in between the commons and capital, right? So you have capital accumulation, you have commons accumulation. And what we really need today is cooperative accumulation. And it's the convergence between commons and co-ops that will create a new economy and a new society. And to the young people here, and a lot of them will do the kind of things I described more and more, the idea is the following. So these commons are producing commons, but then when you want to make a living, you think startup, right? So the notion of a co-op is not very well known in the young generation, so they think startup. And in the cooperative world, the commons is not very well known. So I think this is the convergence we need to think about. Thank you so much.